I'm Lisa Shepard, and I am the Executive Director of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism. The mission of the CJCP is to enhance professionalism among North Carolina lawyers, judges, and law students, a mission which it has been doing since 1998. One of the ways that the CJCP does this is to sponsor this historical video series, which is a collection of video interviews of distinguished lawyers, judges, and professionals from across North Carolina. The CJCP began filming these video interviews in 2000 as a means to preserve the thoughts of these bar leaders on the legal profession and on professionalism issues. All of the videos in this series are available to you on the CJCP website and the CJCP's dedicated YouTube channel. We are so fortunate to have had many distinguished members of the North Carolina Bar over the years, and they have much accumulated wisdom to share with us. It is important to understand that the practice of law is a profession, and doing it well requires not only substantive knowledge that one gains in law school and from studying for the bar exam, but also the value of experience learned from other lawyers. I hope that this video series will give you not only a fresh insight into the person being interviewed, but also some meaningful information about how to be a better lawyer in your own practice. Enjoy, and remember, esse quam videri. Strive to be professional in all that you do, rather than to merely seem so.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism's historical video series. Today we are honoring former Chief Justice Rhoda Billings as a recipient of the 2016-2017 Chief Justice's Professionalism Award. She is being interviewed by John R. Buddy Wester, both former presidents of the North Carolina Bar Association, and I hope you enjoy this interview.
Good morning, Rhoda Billings.
Good morning, Buddy Wester.
It's good to be with you today. I was reviewing your resume. It seems like it should be called something other than that, but that's what I did, and I'm struck by the scope of the things you've taken on and the excellence of it all. There are just not many folks who can lay claim to being first in the law school class, and I think in your case at age 14, and then in the judiciary, both the trial bench at the district court, where the face of justice, our citizens meet the face of justice more often than any other court. Then the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, serving as the Justice of the Supreme Court. Your career in private practice, and then teaching at Wake Forest Law School for so long. The first person in history to be president of the North Carolina Bar Association and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. That might not repeat. I've mentioned those few elements, but without turning aside from being the mother of fine children and the devoted wife. Putting aside those family features of your record, what has been the part of that you think holds it together? What has been the fundamental of it for you?
That's a very hard question, but I've had tremendous opportunities, and they're things that have come to me from other people. I'm not a person who seeks out position or opportunities, but for some reason, and I guess it started with graduating from Wake Forest Law School and knowing some really great people, but it just seemed that, and part of it I think started with being elected a district court judge as the district court system was created, and therefore one of the first in the district court system. combined with the fact that I was a woman. There's no question that being a woman has been a real asset to my career, but it gave me some degree of visibility. And for some reason, that visibility has continued throughout my life, that people do ask me to do things. And that's a tremendous asset, because I'm not one to sort of self-start. But I do hope that when I am asked to do a job, I do it adequately.
I mentioned a few moments ago your service on both the trial court, the district court, a position for which you ran, am I correct?
Correct.
And you served on our Supreme Court, and you were in a statewide judicial race for that, were you not?
Right.
Looking back on that and reflecting on the fact that we just concluded a statewide election that had 6 candidates running statewide, share with us your recollections and your sense of where we are in North Carolina in 2017.
Well, in 2017, we were probably about the same place we were in 1968 when I first ran, and that is that running for a judicial office does 2 things. One is it's impossible to get any attention, because a justice is not supposed to and should never prejudge issues. Those are things to be determined after legal arguments, study, and discussion and collaboration with the other members of the court. And so running for a judicial office is an extremely frustrating thing.
You can say that with a smile. That's a good sign.
I remember being at an event, and a woman coming up to me when I was running for Chief Justice and said, "Well, what's your position on abortion?" Well, obviously, I responded in the traditional way that I can't take a position on that. That's something that, if it comes before me, then I will have to evaluate and consider in every possible way to make the judgment that the law requires. Of course, the person sneers, turns around, and walks away. I haven't given. The point of this is that it is not a political position. And so one of the things that we've seen over the past several decades is that the public perceives it as political, and as a result, it has become political. The other thing, of course, is that without being able to persuade people because of your positions on issues, the public really doesn't have an interest in this race, that is the race for judicial positions, and pays very little attention to them, and therefore has no idea for whom they should vote. Well, all of your lawyer friends, of course, will tell you that their friends who are not lawyers always come to them to ask them, for whom should I vote? The vast majority of people don't have those relationships, and so either don't vote, very large percentage don't vote, or vote on some basis other than knowledge of the qualities of the candidates. And of course, we saw in this election that some of the results were simply not explainable on the basis of knowing the qualities of the people.
The person listed first in each statewide race of the 6 races.
Person who was listed first in those statewide races, yes.
Do you have a dream that as you have the opportunity to speak with colleagues and people who are in government, that North Carolina might make the change that you speak of here to doing it another way?
I've only worked on an effort for that result probably about 40 years. Of course, the North Carolina Bar Association has had that as one of its major interests for a long time. And when I worked with the Medlin Commission, the commission that the last time before what's going on now with Chief Justice Martin's commission, the Medlin Commission appointed by Chief Justice Exum looked at question of judicial selection. They made a recommendation, or we made a recommendation for a form of judicial appointment. That has continued to be an effort and has been strongly recommended to Chief Justice Martin's commission, and we'll see if they come out also in support of some form of judicial selection other than partisan election, or election, whether partisan or nonpartisan.
Do you have confidence it could be done? That is, there is a better way to choose judges than the public, uninformed as you've described, going to the polls with for candidates who can't say where they stand. And you do believe there's a better way?
I do believe there's a better way. I believe it's possible to achieve it. I believe that a different way will help to remove from the perception of the public that judges base their decisions on political positions.
Yeah. In the cases you presided over involving domestic relations and assault and battery.
In the district court you're talking about.
In the district courts. Were you able to discern which was the Republican or the Democratic position?
No, there was not one.
And likewise, in the Supreme Court, except for districting cases, you know, and things that have quintessentially a political interest, very little comes there that has a Democratic or Republican position to it.
Exactly. And people, when they think of politics in the judiciary, are influenced a great deal by their perception of the politicization of courts in the United States Supreme Court. You don't see that in our North Carolina Supreme Court. There simply is not a partisan divide on our North Carolina Supreme Court.
I see. Madam Chief Justice, in addition to your service in the on the bench and in private practice, a large portion of your career you devoted to academics, to teaching in law school. As you look on that time, and there will be many here in the audience whom you have taught, as you look on that time and you evaluate where we are today in legal education, how do you feel about it, the good and the bad?
There's a lot good going on. When I taught, when I started teaching, I taught like I had been taught, and that was with the Socratic method. I do get constant comments from former students about the fact that every time they are in my presence, they feel like they need to stand to talk because I was one of the ones that stayed with that method much longer perhaps than it was useful, but I found it effective. But the education has now moved to much more of experiential learning, which seems to be a good thing. That is, students learn by doing more than just by attending a class and responding to questions about cases that they have read from a case book. I think it requires a combination, but I'm on the Board of Advisors for Elon Law School and have been very interested in seeing what they've done in changing first to experiential learning to a greater degree, to professionalism training in a greater degree, and to putting their students into and the third point is making the law school a 2.5-year expense. Had an interesting comment from Dean Reynolds of Wake Forest about how much more they are doing experiential learning, and that when she talked with some of the people who had employed recent graduates of the law school, her comment that they were saying it seemed more like the people they were hiring were lateral hires rather than introductory hires by recent graduates, which says volumes about how much students are learning about the practice in law school. Now the downside, you said the good and the bad.
Well, perhaps I should rephrase the good and the not as good.
The not as good is the number of students who are going to law school but without a great deal of confidence that they will be able to succeed, spending a lot of money because of the number of law schools and the number of students that are entering law school who really, in some law schools, do not have a realistic chance of becoming lawyers and earning a living.
You see a solution for that?
Well, we just need, in some instances, fewer law schools. And
Is there a gatekeeper?
it's been, of course, the American Bar Association has always sort of been a gatekeeper by their accreditation process, but they have seemed to accredit schools sometimes that perhaps should not have been. Apparently, they have now decided, based on some problems nationwide with the performances on the bar exams, they've decided that bar exam pass rates are going to be taken as a significant indicator of the quality of the law school, and to put on probation or to remove accreditation if there are schools that traditionally, chronically, do not prepare their students well enough for them to be successful on the bar exam.
Well, I think it's in one of the fine songs in The Sound of Music. Let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. What event or series of events, what thoughts came into your mind as you moved toward the idea, I'm going to become a lawyer? I doubt you foresaw, maybe you did, the Chief Justiceship and storied career as a professor, president of the North Carolina Bar Association, first person in history to have the Chief Justice and the Bar Association position. But you've done all these things. How did it go at the beginning?
Well, you're right that I never foresaw the career that I have had. I grew up in Wilkes County, North Carolina. My father was a small-time lawyer, did just about everything. I never saw him practice, never saw him in court. But growing up in a household with a parent as a lawyer, obviously it's one of the things you think about.
Did he encourage you and say, I think you ought to be a lawyer?
I don't think he ever considered it. I don't think, because I never expressed it at home. It was just one of those things. But in high school, as you start thinking about, well, what am I going to do after I get out of here? It was about the time that Susie Sharp was quite prominent in North Carolina because of her role as a woman Superior Court judge and eventually as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So came along at a time that it was not something that was unheard of. I never considered myself to be, as she was, a real pioneer, but given that there had been sort of a pioneer before, it was something to consider. Went to Berea College in Kentucky, graduated a semester early and went to work in Washington, D.C. as an accounting clerk in the court up there. Don Billings, whom I knew from high school, he was several years ahead, not several, 3 years ahead of me, and I had dated him a time or two. He was in Washington, and we sort of reconnected. And both of us were looking for our career paths, mine having just graduated from college and looking for something to do in that semester before maybe I entered into a graduate program or whatever, and he was getting out of the Navy. We decided that we wanted to get married, and we talked extensively about where to live and what to do, and made a mutual decision that we would both go to law school. So, since he was 3 years older, he got to go first. I gave birth to a couple of kids and then went to law school when he graduated and set up his practice in Winston-Salem.
So there was no seminal event, no moment I found it. It was a progression.
It was a progression.
Progression.
Yes.
And did you tell your father? Do you remember the time when you told your father, "I'm going to go to law school"?
I don't remember the time I
Yeah.
said that. I do remember just his tremendous pride in my being Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, and thought that everybody in the state should recognize me immediately if I came into their presence.
Yes. We've spoken of the lack of a seminal moment in your deciding to become a lawyer. As you went through the legal education and your career, do you have mentors in mind?
Of course, I went to the Wake Forest Law School at the time that probably some of the most renowned professors that ever taught there were there. Dean Carol Weathers was the dean, and if you talk about professionalism, there's no greater paragon of professionalism than Carol Weathers was, and he did his best to instill his view of what a lawyer should be in the students at Wake Forest.
Did he interview you before your admission?
Oh, he absolutely interviewed
Yeah.
me. He interviewed everybody who was admitted to law school at that time.
Gave new meaning to the term cross-examination for you?
I'm not sure that I felt it was a cross-examination, but it was a very in-depth interview.
Right.
As I mentioned, Don went to law school before I did, and he went to Duke. And Don would come home talking about what he had experienced at law school, and of course I sort of went through law school with him, which gave me a great leg up on understanding legal principles, even in taking the LSAT. There were, at the law school, I've mentioned Carol Weathers, but Professor Sizemore, Professor Wiggins, they were just incredibly good professors. And of course, Dr. Lee was legendary. And then as I started my career, not only had Don given me this sort of leg up by going to law school before and sharing with me as he loves to share, he has been my #1 mentor and my #1 supporter. I've often said he had a lot more faith in me than I had in myself, and except for that, I wouldn't have been able to do some of the things that I've been able to do.
Well, Rhoda Billings, I think our time is accomplished. I thank you very much for your time and thoughtfulness. It's highly characteristic of you to dig deeper than any of the questions with your answers. I will say, as one grateful lawyer, I'm grateful to have been at the bar while you've been a leader in so many ways. When you won the John J. Parker Award, the highest award the Bar Association gives, I'm familiar with a nomination of you, and it said, that nomination said that you would burnish the image of the John J. Parker Award. You have done exactly that, and for a full career. I know I stand in a long line of lawyers who are most grateful for your leadership and across such a wide spectrum, and for living the highest ideals of professionalism. All of us here, I know, join in our expression of pride in knowing you and all that you have stood for. Thank you very much.
Oh, Buddy Wester, I want to thank you not only for those extraordinarily kind words, but for your willingness both to do this interview and to present me with the John J. Parker Award, and for all that you have done as well within the profession. Thank you.